Hello. This is the final week of our study. Everyone say, "Aw, man." But we've got some really good stuff to get through tonight. We're going to hear from Jim Wallace one last time, and it's a good one. We're talking about moving from serial charity to a just society, which wouldn't that be wonderful if we could figure out how to do that? So the key issue that we're diving into tonight is it says the deeper theological issue is not whether, but how Christians should engage with those who are poor in bringing about greater human dignity and justice. So we already know this is something we should be doing, but we're going to continue talking about how to do it, and we'll probably be talking about that forever as we're trying our best to get it done. So we'll do the video, and there are sheets on your table for an opportunity to take notes. I didn't pass out pens, but I think there are some back there, or you might have one in your purse or in your pocket. And then we'll do big room discussion like we have been doing, and then Bible discussion at your table. So let me read this welcome before we jump into the video to hear from Jim Wallace. It says, "Some think we can change poverty just by helping poor people in our families, churches, and neighborhoods, or by doing economic development in the community. These services do provide vital aid for many people. It is important to shelter the homeless, feed the hungry, and engage in development projects abroad. Others think all we must do is address poverty is to lobby and talk to members of Congress. But neither charity nor advocacy alone is adequate. What will truly change things is nothing less than a movement, a social movement. And faith has been at the center of every single social reform movement in our nation's history." Okay, I thought that was pretty good. Before we jump into the first question, what stood out to you? How are you feeling and thinking after that message from Jim Wallace? Allison, up here.
What I heard him say repeatedly is that people took responsibility. That was the action. That's what brought people together, and to make a decision and then to take action. But that's what I heard repeatedly. Was, they took responsibility, and then it was possible to do all of these things that may have seemed impossible.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Thank you.
I heard him say that we can't just pull people out of the water. We have to figure out why they're getting in the first place.
Mm-hmm. That is one of my favorite ways to talk about different types of mission work, especially this, what did he call it? What is the name of this session? Serial, thank you. The serial charity is standing along the riverbank and just pulling people out of the water until the end of time. And you can't make any changes until you walk upstream and see that the bridge is out or someone is pushing people in. And it takes both efforts to make a real difference. Yeah, that's one of my favorite ways to talk about missions. Give me one more good one and then we'll move on to the questions. Nancy, we've got two.
I just like the phrase changing the wind, because I just think that's really what needs to happen.
Yeah.
That it's something you can't see, it's a critical mass, it's, but necessary.
Mm-hmm. A critical mass is a great way to put it too. And And then Biana had something.
His conclusion of connecting our faith to justice that then leads to movement or actions or change. I think our tendency is, even as churches sometimes, to keep those a bit separate for a variety of reasons, and think of justice as the legal things and all that, which there is that aspect. But Scripture, as he listed a whole bunch of them, the justice that came about was because of the faith of a person that listened to God and exercised that responsibility to obey God, whether it was Esther or whoever that he mentioned. And it's easy for us, especially when we have funds available that are needed and used, and it's a blessing for missions, to sort of get not stuck, but just keep going in that. Well, that shows our faith, and it does. It shows amazing faith, especially of the history of this church, and that's really important. But also for us now, looking at our neighborhood and our communities around us, to ask ourselves the question, how is our faith? What is God saying to us about being responsible for our neighborhood? And that's a tough question that we all need to ask ourselves as individuals and the church repeatedly. It's not a new question. It's part of growth.
And I'm glad that you mentioned the word justice, because I think we do get caught up on that word a lot because it feels very political and legal. But we are actually participating in justice work all the time. Like when we feed people at our mobile food pantries, that's food justice. We're taking food that these people couldn't afford to buy or didn't have access to, and we're, instead of it being wasted by large corporations who sell food, that food being wasted is unjust. All of the things that keep people from being able to afford food is unjust. And so we take these two unjust things and put them together to provide this food for free to people who need it, and that's justice. So we participate in justice all the time. It's not this big scary word that we're not involved in, because we most certainly are. Okay, that was my soapbox. Let's get into the first question. So Jim Wallace discusses the difference between renewal and revival. What is that difference? This is a quiz to see if you were paying attention. And what have you seen, maybe it's so to say, as evidence of this in your own faith community? So what is the difference between renewal and revival, and what have you seen as evidence of this in your own faith community?
I heard Jane say one's individual and one's the whole society.
Very good, Jane. Thank you. That is, yeah. What else?
This isn't exactly the difference, but when I think of it, renewal is not only individuals, but a church can go through renewal also, where it's a relooking at sort of us and our individual lives and taking responsibility and those kind of things, making those decisions. And I read somewhere else recently talking about revival, because if anybody who's seen the news lately, well, maybe not anybody, but a lot of people has seen some churches really having a lot of people coming to their churches in the last few weeks that had not come before, and people are talking about revival worldwide even. But what I was reading really impacted me, because it says you can't say it's revival until it results in a change or action in the society, in the community. That it's renewal, it's return, but that revival is beyond that. It's that taking responsibility and obedience and moving forward.
Hmm? Thank you, Biana. Jamie?
Renewal is when you rebuild it and make it new again. And revival is when you go to church and pray for what you want to have made new.
Great. Thank you, Jamie. What renewals or revivals have you seen in this community? Nancy?
I think part of the renewal I've seen here is because we have those councils, and I think that they have, especially missions, they've elevated missions opportunities and contributions more than it was in the past. It was because it's all, kind of unified and and the same for the other discipleship and worship and community.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Have we ever seen revival in this place? You can think back. Tell me something historic. You have a story?
No, I just remember that we used to have revival every year. And you sing that song, Lord Send a Revival.
Oh, you'd have that big. Andy? Andy, then Drew.
And Habitat for Humanity has done and it's based upon I forget the guy that started it down in Americas, but I met him, I can't think of his name. But it was based upon a Christian principle.
Jordan. Clarence Jordan.
What's that?
Clarence Jordan.
No,
Aaron?
that wasn't his name. That wasn't the guy I'm talking about. Huh?
He was in America's, but I don't think he was Habitat.
Yeah, Habitat for Humanity. But anyway, they create wealth, and the homeowners have to do what they call sweat equity. And I worked on a lot of projects up in around D.C. And people kept pride in it, and once you get equity, you have options. And this society is based on consumerism, and so they tell poor people, go buy you a luxury car instead of buying a house and fix it up. And people that don't understand capitalism fall for that. But if you, and one thing this whole thing hasn't done is Dr. King was killed not because of voting, but when you start talking about economics through the Poor People Command, Poor People Campaign. And once you get economics, you ain't got to ask nobody for nothing. And I don't think people want that. But you can do it, but they don't want you to learn if you didn't grow up or find it some kind of way.
Yeah. Thanks, Andy.
Yeah, Millard Fuller was his name. His name was Millard Fuller.
Millard Fuller.
And they had an area down there in America where black and white owned land, and they were burned out by the Klan and stuff. And then it became Habitat for Humanity.
Thanks, Andy. Drew? Okay.
I
George?
think when you
Wait for a microphone.
Oh gosh, okay. I've never had this. Okay. Looks like a big ice cream cone. Okay, the sense that we've lost a pastor, an assistant pastor recently, and we've risen to the occasion with a minimal staff, and now we've formed a search committee to look for a new pastor, and our church continues and we're trying to improve. I think all that's renewal. In
Yeah.
the sense that we're continuing what we've done in the past, but we're marching forward.
Mm-hmm.
And it's never the same every time we do it. And so the process differs based on the characters involved in it. And that is a type of renewal, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Because this church is going to be a different place once we get a new pastor in here.
Mm-hmm.
So
It's a different place now than it was a year
it's
ago.
a different place now, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because you all are here. We've seen a lot of changes. I think that's renewal.
I think so too.
Hey, I'm Kristen. I just am looking at the word revival, and if you break it down, viva is live, and so I think of it as living again. So that renewal, is, I don't know, kind of guaranteed cycle of things.
Mm-hmm.
And that's all I have to say.
Thank you. Okay, let's move on to the next question. We've got a few more. Thanks, everyone. MLK, Martin Luther King Jr., uses the power of the faith community to push President Johnson, we learned about this in the video, to enact a civil rights law for the black community. How is the civil rights movement an example of bringing revival to the land? I heard you all talk a lot about renewal and examples of renewal. So how was this an example of revival? Yep, Karen said it impacted everyone. Mm-hmm. What else? Biana?
Well, and it was when the faith community leaders brought along their churches into the movement, the actions that were risky and resulted in dangerous situations. Mm-hmm. That's when it became revival. That is why it was. It was beyond just thinking in a new way. It was that faith that moved them to actually do something, and that's often the hard part.
Mm-hmm. Allison?
I would think we all would have a lot to say about how the civil rights movement brought revival, because it did bring revival in so many different ways. The first thing that comes to my mind is the fact that they were committed to a path of nonviolence, and that was so convincing, and it attracted everyone, maybe not everyone, but so many people. It gave righteousness, to the movement, because everyone knew they were not trying to accomplish something selfish, that it was going to benefit everyone, and that it was the right thing to do, and it needed to be done, and it should have been done earlier. But it was just, I think, that moral strength, and not reacting and in anger and not being provoked when there was so much injustice that they were treated with.
Mm-hmm. And then when that peace was met with violence, who showed up to the front lines? The pastors, the faith communities showed up to the front lines with the people who were suffering.
So the contrast.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Drew?
I was just thinking about how, talks about MLK at this point, but back into the 50s, pastor of this church was part of a movement of pastors who called for civil rights to be enacted. And, between, in fact, recently there was somewhere I saw a remembrance of the bombing of the temple just down the street from us here that was done as an act of violence against Jews and against the civil rights activities that their rabbi had participated in. So, I mean, I don't know, they ever caught the bombers, or maybe more than one. But nonetheless, so it's not something that happened overnight, certainly. It was something that had begun after the end of World War II, as these black soldiers came back and said, we're fighting for freedom in another land when we don't have freedom in our own land. And that just rolled along with a movement that had begun already.
Phil?
Yeah, just to further underscore what Drew and Allison are saying, I would edit out the phrase "for the black community" on this slide, because the whole point of the civil rights movement was to create equal rights for everybody, and that led to open doors for women and for other oppressed minorities. Now, certainly, there were people in the traditional power structure who thought that their position and their power was being threatened, and they may have characterized it as, taking away their rights, but that certainly it wasn't the goal of the Civil Rights Movement or the Voting Rights Act.
Thank you. Okay, let's keep going with questions. What problem, this is the Columbus, Ohio story from the video. What problem was affecting the Columbus, Ohio churches before the Justice Revival began? What was the disconnect that Jim Wallace pointed out in his discussion with church leaders? And then this was actually two separate questions, but I combined them because I thought we were going to end up talking about this anyways. Do you see a similar disconnect in the neighborhood surrounding this church? So what was the problem? What did Jim Wallace say the disconnect was? And do we see that in our community? And if you're having trouble remembering, I've watched the video more than once. Okay, Hal first and then Drew.
Was he saying that the churches were becoming very successful, but they were not reaching out beyond the church buildings to the neighborhood?
He was saying that.
Yeah, I mean, I think he used the word, you have this renewal, I guess was the word he would use, and yet your city is crumbling around you.
The churches were thriving and growing, and they were having these moments of renewal within this bubble, and it was never turning into revival because they were so focused on what was happening in this bubble that their city was not reflecting what was going on in their worship space. Do you see that disconnect in our community? It could be. Okay.
The disconnect is an interesting concept because I feel like every church is at a different point in their idea of what their glory days might have been, or everybody's showing up every Sunday now, we can't find place in the parking lot. And I feel like, and I know anybody in this room knows this because we attend here regularly, that we're not filling the parking lot, we're not filling the sanctuary. So we think, oh, our neighborhood has left us, they don't care about us, so what do we owe them? They don't mind us. And I have to wonder, based on the churches in Columbus is what is the effects of being so inwardly focused. I'm not placing blame on any particular era or church, but is the inevitable nature of a church inwardly focused result in just kind of this hollowed out place that used to be so special? Not that I'm not speaking about this church directly, but I'm just wondering if that's an inevitable aftermath.
Thank you. Howell?
And in the last couple of years, there seems to be a movement toward more connection. You know, there are those of us who do go read at the school and connect that way, and do other service things at Garden Hills when asked. And the food bank is a new initiative that's very outside the walls of the church. So I think that we might be encouraged that we're moving slowly, but surely.
I would call our work with Toco Hills to be a bit of revival. It is something that has bubbled up from our passion within this space, and because Jesus told us to feed people, and we learned that here, and we talk about that here, and so we go out and feed people. That's a little chunk of revival, I think.
And follow up, I felt like I was being a little negative. Hal was exactly right. Whoever is in the sanctuary on Sunday should not dictate how you continue to reach out to your community and be on mission to bring about the kind of revival that any church, no matter how big or small, can do in their community.
But it does speak to being able to find that source of renewal within your faith community. So that renewal needs to be there. And I think it's here, and I think we can do better at it sometimes, but I think it's here. Yeah. Any other thoughts before we move on? I think there's one more question. Oh, well, this is just if anyone wants to throw out an example, how might we be able to bring revival to our community? So if you were in church on Sunday, you heard me preaching a little bit about works originating in our community of faith, those passions that we find together, bubbling over into the work that we do in the world. If you could bring a bit of revival to our community based on the passion that you feel or that you see in this space, what would you want to do? It can be crazy. Say whatever you want. George?
We need to join with other churches in the community.
To do what?
I'm not sure exactly.
Okay.
But perhaps, learn from them and share with them what has been successful for us and what has worked for them. I don't know that we need to reinvent a lot of things, but
Okay.
I don't think we do that enough.
Don't invite them to church. And I was saying, but a lot of the community is very different. Like a lot of the mobile food pantries, they're Hispanic. We don't speak Spanish. We don't have a Spanish service. It would be nice to know what churches out there do and where we could plug them in to somebody else, where they can get fed and get the nourishment and get the support that they need that we can't provide because we just don't have that. But knowing what is connecting with other churches and knowing what they're doing and what resources they have available to the different population.
Yeah.
And I don't think churches will be hesitant to tell us what they're doing and what's successful or what might not be successful. I think they'll be very eager to do so, in fact. But I don't think we do enough of that. I think we're insular.
Sorry, keep going.
I have even been told that we don't want the other community churches to know how we are.
Well, who told you that?
I'm not going to say. I'm not going to say. But anyway, I'm just saying it's not a secret.
No, it's
We're not
not.
guarding a secret. Anybody can look into the parking lot and tell what the story is. So I don't think we're having to hide anything. I think it's evident. So I'm just saying, I think that we can learn from others in our community, and by doing so, we can join hands with them often. And in strength, there's numbers. In numbers, there's strength. Is strength. And I don't know. I think that's a good thing to do, especially since we're in a community that has so many large churches. We only have to walk across the street to about 4 churches. So I don't see any reason not to do so.
What you're talking about is reminding me of the story Jim Wallace was telling about Columbus, is that he started talking about all those big churches, and he commented that they were probably arguing over who was going to whose church and trying to fight over the same people because they wanted them to come to their church. But then at the end of that example, those churches collectively decided to make Columbus their parish. Not one and then the other one. They didn't split it up into different chunks. They came together and they decided to make Columbus their parish. What does that look like to make Buckhead our parish?
Just a thought. Building on that, we are somewhat aware of a number of other ministries through churches in our communities around us that are very active and are serving people that we have not been involved in serving. And what if we did take more active steps to join with them in that work they're always doing, particularly maybe the ones that are serving the homeless? We're already doing food things. What about serving the homeless through joining with them in some of their food services that already exist?
Like providing meals.
Exactly, but that's something we need to look at as a congregation, as far as our faith in God. And if God is calling us to do that and asking us to do that, then how would we do that? And we would need to wrestle with some questions for ourselves and us as a congregation, that if we're going to have people we would at sometimes, I wouldn't say this, but they've been referred to this way as others inside our fellowship hall in here when we're serving them a meal. I mean, that's, to some people, really risky. To others, it would oh my goodness, I'd love to do that. But God can help us to work through that. And he may say yes, and it may be a no. It may be something else totally. And I think we're at a place now with a new pastor coming, and just like many of you have mentioned, different transitions, that we're a bit more open now than we were 2-3 years ago to moving into new ministry areas like that to help those in our neighborhood that we see on the streets all the time. So my personal hope from the Missions Council, I'm sure the whole council, is that these kind of things would become things that we as individuals are asking ourselves and are willing to have those discussions with each other and to see what God would do, because God has a plan.
Allison?
I just have my little hobby horse that I have to repeat when this issue comes up, not only to think about working with other churches, but with other nonprofit organizations. Respite Care Atlanta, that operates out of this space, it does such an amazing job, and that is a consortium of 9 churches on Peachtree Road that work together. And the staff of RCA are very creative, and they know the other congregations quite well and work with them. And so anyway, I would include the resources that we have, like the Community Wellness Center and the nonprofits that are kind of resident, in our church. We can mobilize those resources because we do have an amazing network. That is, and it does always amaze me just when I come here during the week and I see the parking lot is 100% full.
It sure is.
Every single parking place, all the way to the back, is parked, and there's you worry about the traffic, with all the different programs and the kindergarten and everything, and So I think that is revival. That's a form of revival that, we just may not even understand fully because we might traditionally be thinking about just who's showing up on Sunday.
And let me add also that I think we can look at community to me in geographic terms to mean more than within walking distance of the church. I mean, I'm not dismissing the idea of having more outreach to our immediate physical neighbors, but there are churches, there are organizations, there are people in need throughout the Atlanta metropolitan area. And most of the people who come to services on Sunday, if I'm not mistaken, are not walking here. I mean, we're driving from all over. So we can have outreach that is not defined only in geographic terms.
Absolutely. We have mission partners all over the place. Precisely. Yeah. Well, I have been really struck by this study specifically tonight in calling us to be responsible, to choose a space, choose a thing, choose something to call ourselves responsible for. And then when issues arise, when a need arises, because you are responsible for it, you bring out everything you have to fix it or to help it or to be a part of it. So I think that's a good challenge for us to choose something to be responsible for. And those things can happen organically. They can happen from an individual's passion. I am feeling more and more called to food justice in our city because of our great nonprofit relationships and relationships with other churches in the area, which are growing and deepening. So hope we find passion to do good works. And I think that's the point of all of this. We've gone over time. So we just are so good at good discussion that we never get to our Bible study. So do it at home, or at least tell me that you did. Any final thoughts? This is the end of this study. Any last words? Anyone feeling called to share something or to say one last thing? You're welcome. Happy to do it. It's my favorite thing to talk about. Okay, let me pray really, really, really quickly before everyone gets up. Let's pray. God, thank you so much for this time that we have spent together, for relationships that are strong enough to have hard conversations around the table and we still leave as family. God, empower us, enliven us, revive us, to see what is needed, to find our passion, and to do your work in the world. In Jesus' name we pray, amen.